Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for coming to our event conversation with MichelleBoyd and me, DeanaLewis. I am one of the associate directors here at the Institute for Research on Race and Public Policy, also known as IRRPP, which is supposed to be shorter, but sometimes doesn't always become shorter. And I use she, her pronouns. So before we get started, I just want to do a little housekeeping for folks. So we're recording the conversation in our very high-tech setup for people in the room. Don't be jealous. So we have people coming into the Zoom right now. The recording will be posted about 2 to 3 weeks after the conversation. The chat on the Zoom is shut down, and you can use the Q&A function on Zoom to put your questions in. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. And for folks in the room, we'll pass around a microphone so that you can ask your questions, and folks on Zoom will be able to hear it. And the captions are enabled on Zoom. So if you want to show them, if you want to hide them, it's completely up to you. And I'm beyond excited to be sitting here next to MichelleBoyd, and I'm honored to be in conversation with her. Michelle is not only an amazing person, she's an outstanding coach and scholar. And so I'm super excited to talk about her book and hear her brilliance today. And I also just want to say that there are over 250 people registered for this event, which is a testament to Michelle as just an amazing person. And we have people signing in from all over the US and all over the world. People from Botswana, from Australia, from Canada, maybe other places. I couldn't go through the entire list and pick people out, but it's really exciting to be here. So let me introduce our friend, not just a guest, a friend, MichelleBoyd. She is the founder of Inkwell Academic Writing Retreats, a transformative retreat-based training program that teaches scholars to overcome their writing fears. And you'll hear more about Inkwell as we progress through the conversation, and you should feel free to ask about it. We'll be talking about retreats too. She's also a self-described, quote, struggling writer, end quote, whose success as an award-winning former tenured faculty member belied the challenges she faced throughout her career as an academic. Scholars who work with Michelle call her magical, but she says it's not magic, it's science, right? Come on, it's science, everybody. We're academics. Her coaching programs are rooted in research, showing that each scholar has their own natural writing process. Again, we'll be talking about that. And that many of their struggles come from external barriers that prevent them from recognizing, accessing, or trusting the process when they need it. Michelle has been leading retreats since 2012, when she co-founded and coached her first retreat as a faculty member. Some of you might know that as Write Out, which we'll also talk about. The only thing she loves more than writing is helping scholars who dread writing develop a calm, confident, and productive writing practice. Her latest book, which we will be talking about today, Becoming the Writer You Already Are, it's also on sale at the back of the room, examines why writing is so challenging and how academics can rely on their writing process to find solutions to those challenges. So if we can give a round of applause and some, I'll trust that the people on Zoom are like, yeah, we're excited as they're cleaning their houses. So when Michelle and I talked a couple of weeks ago about this event, we talked about different ways to frame it. And we're going back and forth, and I'm like, and Michelle said, well, what do you want to know? I said, well, I know when I'm talking with folks that they're really, they're struggling. Right? So they want to become unstuck and stay unstuck. That's key. So we're going to talk about that. But then I also said, there's a word that I don't like. It's empowerment. And I don't like it when people say, I don't like this word, I don't like using it, and then they go ahead and use it. Yeah. So then I went ahead and used it. Yeah, because what else am I going to do? I can't think of another word. And Michelle said, yeah, it's not it. And she said, you know what I do? I talk about it as being emboldened. So today, as we go through this conversation, I want you to think about emboldened and being emboldened in your writing practice, in your academic, scholarly practice, and also in our personal lives. Okay. So of course I have some questions because this wouldn't be a conversation without questions. Well, it's not actually true. We could go back and forth, but that'd be more of a podcast, which I'd be really excited about. Subtle hint to Amanda in the back. So before we get to your book, I want to talk about kind of your trajectory to becoming a full-time writing coach. So you went from professor to professor/writing coach to being a full-time, full-on writing coach. So can you talk about that, please?
I can. I'm happy to talk about that. But before I talk about that, I just want to say thank you to IRRPP, to DeanaLewis, who's the director of IRRPP. Yes, give her a hand, please. And also to you, Deana, for having me here. I am so geeked to be here. This literally is the most exciting thing I think I've done with my book. And I am so it was so much fun to come back on campus, and used to hate these buildings and now I love them. And so, yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Okay. Your question was about the trajectory. Yeah. Professor to professor coach to coach. So that was kind of an accident. It wasn't something that I was planning to do. And honestly, when I kind of think back to where I was, when I started thinking about doing something other than being a professor, I think I was kind of burnt out. I didn't really realize that at the time, but I'd just gotten tenure and, you know, everything was supposed to be wonderful. And I just felt tired and like, I don't think I can do this anymore. And I had no idea what I wanted to do instead. Mm-hmm. And so because of some very generous and understanding administrators at the time, I was able to start working with IRRPP. And eventually we got a few more staff, and one of the other staff members, Francesca Gaipa, actually suggested that we start having writing retreats at IRRPP. She had heard about this at another institution. She thought it was this great idea. It wasn't even my idea. That's what I'm trying to say. And she said, hey, why don't we do this thing? And everybody agreed. And at some point she says, well, we need somebody to talk to the graduate students when we lead this retreat. And I said, oh, I'll do that. I've been reading a lot about writing process and the craft of writing as I was trying to figure out, what am I going to do? How am I going to, now that I have tenure, what do I actually want to do? And I was really interested in those things. And I thought, and I had also been in writing accountability groups since maybe my second or third year as a professor. So I thought, I'll just sort of do with the graduate students what we do in our accountability groups. And after the first one, I was totally hooked. I just realized there was something happening in a retreat setting that doesn't just happen in an accountability group or even in a one-on-one. And the more we did them, the clearer I got about what that beautiful thing was. That's how it started.
So you went from IRRPP, so writing coach, also associate director, and then you moved on to writing coach full-time.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that, and the reason I want to ask is that there are a number of people who want to be professors, right? And go through school and become professors, and then end up feeling that burnout and not sure what else they can do or want to do. So there's that. But then there are people who are interested in what people are calling the alt-ac or alt-academic route, and getting a PhD, but then maybe going into research or doing, some other things. So I'm wondering, the change from being at UIC and then going full-time.
Yeah, I wish that I could say that it was really well planned and that I had a vision that I was just enacting step by step. What I can say is true is that I had sort of like a 5-year plan. After I realized I really enjoy this retreat thing, I think I'm good at it. I'm able to see some changes and some transformations in students that I wasn't expecting. I sort of thought they'd come, they'd write, they'd get some stuff done, that'd be it. But I kept hearing, oh, I did that thing that you told me about at the retreat, and it changed my writing in between, between the last retreat and this one. So I sort of had this 5-year plan. I thought, oh, I'll make a website, I'll organize one retreat, I'll just try it out and see what happens. And, over 3 or 4 or 5 years, I will decide whether or not this is a safe thing to do. And then Mr. Inkwell got a job offer on the other side of the country. And I had to decide, did I want my 5-year plan to be a 5-month plan? And it turns out I did. So I guess what I would say, people will sometimes ask me about this transition and they're trying to figure out what to do. I think the thing that really helped me was that unintentionally, while I was at my university, I was trying out the thing that I was interested in. This is the nice thing about being a faculty member. You have all this leeway to actually, in your classes or in your department or even outside of your institution, try the thing you want to do. Business people call this market research, right? That's what it is. I wasn't planning to do that, but that's what it was. So it was very accidental, and it was much more than I bargained for. It was much harder than I realized it was going to be, and also much more delightful than I ever realized it could be. Yeah.
I forgot that you moved to the West Coast, and I can't believe, because we had dinner out there.
We did.
I was going on a wine tour of Willamette Valley because Pinot Noir is one of my favorite types of wines. Subtle hint. I like gifts. Okay. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that, that walk through your trajectory, and that you went from 5 years to 5 months, which is huge.
Yeah. I feel that I've done, 2 or 3 very brave things in my life, but that bravery came from ignorance. And this was an example of that. Yeah.
I mean, it worked out.
It did.
It is working out.
It is working out. It's true. Yeah, it worked out, but it wasn't, people say to me all the time, oh, you're so courageous. And I didn't know, I had no idea the breadth of what I was getting into. I just knew that I loved coaching and I loved retreat coaching, and I still love those things. So even though it's been more than I bargained for, it was worth it.
Great. So I want to talk about your book. Well, I want you to talk about your book. So the title of your book is Becoming the Writer You Are, which veers away from other books about writing coaching, and that you already believe in us, which is huge and rare. And you believe that we can do the thing, and that thing is writing. That's what the title says to me. So it's already, before I open the book, I'm already like, oh, nice. Yes, I can do this. Love this. So can you talk more about your motivations for writing the book, and how your book can help us contextualize the problems we have with writing?
I can. But first I want to say, I appreciate you saying that. This is one of the nice things about talking about your book that I didn't quite experience with my first book, which is other people show you things about your work that you hadn't seen. So I would never have used that phrase that I believe in you, but that's true. I do actually believe in scholars as writers. And I believe that in the way that you believe something without evidence, right? But I also have confidence, which comes from evidence, right? So I feel those two things, and I want other people to feel them too. So my motivations for the book, I got this book contract before I started Inkwell. So I was just writing my next book. That was my motivation. So it was partly I was writing my next book. It was partly an editor came to me and said, hey, I saw you wrote this article about this writing metaphor thing. Are you writing a book? I was not writing a book. And I said, I am writing a book. I was also motivated by the fact that I needed to be doing something. I was trying to figure out, what the heck do I want to do with my career? I was also motivated by the fact that I was a little annoyed that there was all this literature on writing process. There's all this literature by scholars that says, hey, you know what? This is really hard. The hardness is built in. here's a bunch of stuff you could do to make it easier. By the way, it's not you, it's all of us, but this was nowhere in my graduate training. It's nowhere, I think, in most people's graduate training. It's nowhere really in the mentoring, in the not mentoring, what's the kind of the official mentoring, right, that comes in institutions when you're a junior faculty member. It just, I was really frustrated by that. And it seemed like there was all this good information out there that, had we known this beforehand, would have really helped. And when I say would have really helped, I think what I mean is it would have helped with the phenomenon that I see in graduate students. I see it in graduate students of color, and I experienced it myself, where you come to graduate school and you're on fire, you know, you are excited, you want to talk about ideas, everything is fun. You think you're like, you think you're smart, right? You're like, I know how to think about things. I enjoy thinking about ideas. And like a couple years in, you like, all the joy is gone, right? You kind of don't remember why you did this. And if you're like me, you forget that you loved writing. That, I think, was the biggest thing. I forgot I loved writing. And when something can make me forget my own desires, that is really disturbing to me. That was a long answer. I hope I.
No, yeah, that's a great answer.
Yeah.
I appreciate you saying that, you know, it's that we come in with this fire and we end up, or not always, but we often end up having that fire dampened. And it's for a lot of people of color. And I also think it's very gendered too. And I was just thinking, we come in, we're like, down with capitalism, down with patriarchy, this is terrible. And I know about this, and dialectical that, and you know, a few years in, we're like, oh, maybe capitalism's okay. I don't know. Because what am I doing? I mean, is anybody going to forgive my loan? I don't think so. I don't even know. You know, what am I doing out here?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I'm like, can I even read one more word? No, because does anybody read one more word? No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Can I say one more thing about this?
Please, yeah.
That you know, in the book, what I'm trying to do is criticize institutions, like, but I also want to be very clear that faculty are as trapped by this as graduate students are, right? Junior people and senior people are as trapped by the expectations around producing more and more and more at a faster and faster rate. And so I want to be very clear that the idea isn't that faculty are falling down on the job by not properly mentoring graduate students, right? The idea is more that institutions need to do a better job of providing the conditions that all scholars need, regardless of their rank, regardless of their position in the institution, to actually do the thing that's being asked of us / you all, which is to write. If you want people to write, you have to create conditions that support writing. So I just want to be clear that it's an institutional criticism, right? It's not an individual criticism.
Yeah, that's helpful. And we were talking about those conditions that make writing harder, and that kind of analysis of the environment, and that it's not individual, right? It's not just, oh, you're not doing well or they're not doing well. It's, we are working, doing this, doing that, and then we're supposed to do these other things, but how do we find the time? And even though it's writing is valued, or says that, or the institution says it values writing, that if we know it's valued when we have the time and space to do it.
That's right. That's right. If it's valued, then, you know, put some resources into it.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah. So I want to talk about this writing problem.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Okay, so here's my question. So people talk about the writing problem or say they have a writing problem. They say, are we resistant? Is it me? What are the techniques to be more efficient? What are the techniques to write more? How many Pomodoros do I need to do? Should I have it on my phone? Should I throw my phone and rip out my internet? But you ask us to ask ourselves about something more than the logistics of writing. So we talked about, when we talked before, we talked about the context and emotions of writing as part of the writing process. So can you talk about the writing process as an emotional process, and how we know or recognize the different emotions we feel and how we deal with them? So it's a three-parter. It's a big one.
Yeah,
we can always go back.
Yeah, thank you. I might
Okay.
need a refresher. So yes, so I can say, I talk about several challenges that we face with writing in the first couple chapters of the book. And one of those challenges, we can think of the challenges as being inherent to the act of writing. Like, it doesn't matter, how comfortable you are, it's just going to be hard, right? Then there are some that are institutional. We've talked a little bit about those. And then there are some that are interpretive. And one of the inherent challenges of writing is that it is a risky proposition, no matter who you are or what you're writing about. Especially for scholars, all of the rewards of the profession come from writing. The reputational rewards, the financial rewards, the positional rewards, matriculation, everything comes, not for everyone, right? But there's a lot of emphasis on that in R1 institutions, and less so as we are in different institutions. So it's risky. And that is a risk that we don't just feel when we're presenting. It's not just a risk when somebody sees our book and gives us feedback, when we're on the Author Meets Critic panel. It is a risk that we feel in the moment of writing. And it appears in various ways. Here's a very simple example. I was leading a retreat last week, and we were actually working on the content in the book, the technique for developing your own writing metaphor so you can flesh out what your process is. And someone was saying, as they were trying to lay out how they might describe what this experience was like for them, they said, oh yeah, and the fact that I'm writing in a second language makes me even more nervous when I have to put anything down on paper, and I'm afraid that what I'm saying doesn't sound right. So this is just a very singular, simple example that we don't necessarily pay attention to, but it's not when this person has to speak on the topic, though I'm sure they feel it then, but it is literally that moment when they were trying to get out the idea. And the challenge of emotions is that we feel them in the body. It's not just that it's running around in our head. It is partly a story, but it is also that, that feeling in your chest. It's the tension in your shoulders. It's your heart beating fast. And the problem with that is when our bodies are having that kind of chemical response, when we're actually feeling fear, it makes it harder to think. And the reason that I even bother to go into this is because this is one of the it's not you things, right? This is literally something that a chemical response that your body is having that you can't, you can influence it, but you can't control it. And so knowing that there are going to be moments when it is harder for you no matter what I'm hoping that does is alleviate some of what I hear from people a lot, which is a lot of shame, a lot of self-recrimination, a lot of embarrassment. We're all going through that. It's just that we're going through that alone and silently and not necessarily sharing it. Was that parts 1, 2, and 3, Deana, or was that only part 1?
I think that was definitely part 1 and 2.
Okay.
So how do people, so recognizing is important.
Yeah.
Recognizing that you are more than likely going to feel this way. Feeling that in the moment, like, oh, I mean, even when you said, when people think of writing or start to write, that your shoulders got tense.
Did your shoulders get tense?
Yes.
Yeah, they did, right?
I was like,
I know.
Oh no, I'm not writing. I have a microphone in my hand. That feels so natural. It's what I love. So, but how do we deal with them?
Yeah.
So how do we deal with them?
So I know this is a very unsatisfactory answer to people, but this is literally the answer. We have to learn the skill of being uncomfortable while we're writing. This is what the book is about, this is what every retreat I lead is about, even if it doesn't seem like it. It's a terrible answer, but it is the only, not the only, but it is one of the main skills. It's a skill that we are not taught. And it's as much a skill to me as whatever your methods are for your discipline, right? It's as important as the substantive knowledge that we gain when we are, studying our area. It's a skill to be able to feel that feeling in your chest and in your throat, and have that loop in your head, and then actually be able to walk yourself into a pocket of calm, so that maybe it doesn't go away, but it quiets down. And so that maybe you don't feel like you can write for an hour, but maybe you could edge up on a couple 10 minutes, right? That maybe turns into an hour. And again, this is something that especially cognitive psychologist Boyce talks about this all the time. We're all Boyce, accountability. You need to have a writing group. You know what? The first thing he says you need to do, calm yourself down before you go into a situation where you're doing enforced writing. So this is about writing, but it's also about, it's just life, right? Like we need to learn to do that for everything. And there are ways that we all have different ways of doing this, but there are ways that we can figure out how to tolerate discomfort long enough so that we can actually access the pleasure and the satisfaction of writing. And I'll say one more thing about that. Often we think that what needs to happen is that we need to get motivated and be ready to write before we write. But in fact, it's involvement in writing that creates motivation. So the more you can just, I like to say, you want to seduce yourself into your writing.
Oh,
Right?
sick now.
Honestly, right? Like we are any scholar, anybody who makes it to graduate school is disciplined, right? You do your work, you're reliable, you show up, you're a hard worker. There's no question about that. You know how to grind through. But the thing I think we don't necessarily know how to do is to actually kind of invite ourselves into our work. Maybe begin with the thing that is the most delightful for you. Like, am I the only person who wishes they could spend 2 hours a day reading and doing nothing else? So what if you were able to just start with 20 minutes of reading? You don't even have to take notes, just literally for pleasure. Ideas get going, and then all of a sudden, like you're writing something down. That's what I mean when I say seduce. You like that, don't
I do.
you? Yeah, you do. I can tell.
I do like that, and we're gonna segue into my other question that's a little bit more specific, but I do love the idea of starting with something you like to do, that makes you feel good. I do love to read. I do like it when I don't know if it's like, but I like the idea of sitting in uncomfortability. If that's a word, it doesn't matter. I'm kind of an academic. I can make up any word I damn well please. And because I think that's where also change happens, when we're uncomfortable, good change. And so I like all of that. Now, I also recognize that and I know reading is a part of the process, but I also know that we also lean, at least for graduates, I'll say for graduate students, lean into reading.
Oh, yeah.
And I've talked with many a graduate student, and this is going to lead into our writing coach question. And I've talked with many a graduate student who's like, I don't know this, so I'm going to read and I'm going to take notes and then I'll write. And I say, I love reading. It's so good. And you know this because it's your topic.
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing is kind of productive procrastination, but also not the confidence in yourself.
Yes.
And I believe in you. I know you can do it because you're here trying to do it. So just try writing. Just go ahead. Just try jumping in.
Yeah.
And just start writing because I know you know it. And there's this one person who's brilliant, and they started a new method, and or I think it was a new method. And they were concerned about it because they had just, that semester had decided to include this. And I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, maybe maybe you do need to read a little bit more. So I just said, you're here during Write Out. I want you to feel confident. So like, just tell me, like, how many articles have you read about this? And the look on this person's face just kind of went blank, kind of got sheepish. And then she said 30. And I was like, you are an expert.
Yeah.
Like, you know more than the people who actually originated this.
Yeah.
And I think it's amazing that they went that deeply into it. And I was like, yes, that's awesome. But now I want you to start writing.
Yeah.
I want you to just get stuff out because you are so smart and you are so amazing. I want you to get stuff out.
Yeah.
So that leads me to this question about the work of a writing coach. What is the work of a writing coach?
So I think the work of a writing coach is to help scholars see things about themselves that they're not able to see on their own. That's one thing. I think it is to, I guess, let me be more precise. When I say see things about themselves, I mean be able to recognize how they work, that they're working, that thing that they're doing constitutes work. And what are the things that you already do in some part of your life that you can apply here to make that work easier, more accessible, feel more possible for you? So, you'll hear a lot of coaches or coaching programs say that, coaching isn't about teaching. I think there's a little bit of teaching in coaching, right? There is some time when you're sharing some things that some ideas, some possibilities for people, and you share those possibilities so people can choose them if they work for them. But part of what you're doing is creating the conditions under which people can see themselves truly and not be caught by whatever story they have. And then be able to achieve something that they didn't think was possible. I feel like I want to give a concrete example of that because that feels really vague to me. I mean, I guess the obvious one is, part of what the book talks about is the fact that we all have a process. And writing process sort of goes through the same phases for everyone, right? And this phase that you were talking about was the initiation phase. You got to start something, right? You got some ideas in your head and you need to start getting something down on paper. That is a standard moment that everyone experiences, but we don't all go through that moment in the same way. Some people like to outline, some people like to Scrivener. You like to talk out loud. Maybe you like to, talk into your voice recorder, right? So the job of a coach is to ask the right questions to the person so that they can remember, what's the way that I find it most fruitful to start something? I feel really afraid to start that way. What can I do to get myself in the space where I'm actually willing and ready to start in that way? What happens when I start that way and I can only do it for 10 minutes? What does that mean about me? These are all the things that, as a coach, I think I'm trying to help people see differently. I don't know, what do you think about this, Deana? Because you coach Write Out.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. So when I first started, after Michelle left, I first started working with graduate students as coaching at Write Out. And when I first started, and I forget what year it was, I went home every day and just knocked out. I was like, oh my God, I felt like I was holding the world for people and they needed it because folks needed to be heard. I don't know what was happening in people's programs with their advisors and mentors, but it was not good. And I leaned on all the tools that you you taught me, and that I have also picked up, and like my facilitation tools, and like doing, the organizing work I do, and I'm like trying to, put it all together. And I really felt like, oh, I'm doing some sort of therapy. Like there's some therapy happening, or the people who I'm talking with this is feeling therapeutic, because at the end of the week, they're like, this was so helpful. I feel so much better. This is great. Meanwhile, I have like massive bags under my eyes. I'm like, oh, good, great. I'm so happy for you. But I was really happy. I'm really happy for everybody. But I mean, because we hear about Write Out. People are like, this was life-changing and amazing. So I see that, and I see it less and less. People are finding other mentors, or they're relying on other people in their lives, or they might even just be going to therapy, which is great. And so there's less, I don't hear as much, I don't know if it's trauma. I don't hear as much, I don't see as much as many of the issues as I saw earlier. So I feel like what I'm doing is listening to people, and often it's people who are like, I'm not good at this, I'm not good at that, I'm not good at this. Because I always ask first, what are your strengths? And people say, well, I can write a lot, but it's not good. And it takes me forever. And maybe I don't write, maybe I'm not good. I'm like, okay, thank you for those learning challenges you gave me, but what are your strengths? I hear you. And so I want to, reconfigure that. So I want to help build confidence. I want to reflect back to them that they're awesome, because they are. So doing a little bit, and then also sharing certain tools that I've heard work for other people. What works for me is free writing. I'm a free writing fool. And the Zoom age, I turn Zoom on, I record, I got my captions going, and I'll just talk into Zoom and like go back and edit. So yeah.
Well, can I say, I think, so you asked me what is coaching, and I have to say to people all the time, because they say the same thing to me, oh, this is like therapy. I'm like, it might be like therapy, it's not therapy. I'm not a therapist,
right?
I'm not qualified, right? Those are feelings. That's all that is, right? Like that is just us having feelings. No, honestly, right? Like us having feelings in a space where it's actually not even that it's not encouraged, but it's discouraged, where you're shamed for having feelings, as if feelings are somehow the opposite of intellect, right? And so I think I'm with you on the therapy thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say I still see quite a lot of that, the sharing of feelings. But I also think the question of what is coaching is different from the question of what is a retreat, because you can coach someone outside of a retreat. And what is happening when I'm coaching a retreat for me is a little bit different than what would be happening, say, for example, if it's a one-on-one coaching session, or even if it's a group coaching session. Mm-hmm. For me, the retreat achieves something as a result of bringing people together. Social writing creates a relational space that has, it has taken me a long time to figure out why the heck it's so transformative. I didn't understand it at first. And the best that I can come up with is it creates this relational space which allows for the disruption of the narrative that we have about what a poor writer we are, at the same time that it is allowing for its disruption in your actions. So there are two things that are happening, right? We get into habits that confirm over and over again our greatest fears about us and our working habits, and that we're not really writers and we're not really good at all of that, right? So there are the acts, and at the same time there's the story. And when a retreat is properly facilitated and the space is properly held for people, not just by the facilitator, but by the other people in the room. You all are all doing the work with one another when it's properly facilitated, of disrupting all of that and creating a relational space in which people's understanding of who they are and what they're capable of is totally blown open. That's the retreat, and that's the thing that I love about them, and the thing that mystified me when I first saw it. And it's, as I said, it's taken a while for me to see that.
Yeah, it has for me too.
Yeah.
So as I think it was last summer. So IRRPP holds multiple writing retreats for graduate students and faculty who are studying race, ethnicity, and policy. And we had I think it was the first after, first in-person hybrid during the pandemic. And pandemic is still ongoing. And I was talking with two faculty members who I hadn't seen in a while and who had started coming to Write Out when you and Francesca created Faculty Write Out. And I was feeling down. I was like, is this even worth, why even, I was feeling bummed out because I was like, oh, as a facilitator or creating the space, it's sometimes not as new, or I was feeling like, should I be doing more? Should I be doing something different? Should I add things in to, make sure people are feeling comfortable and productive? And I was like, is it stale? And I was talking to them and they were like, this is amazing. We'd like to come every year. I couldn't for a while, but this is so important, just the space and just being able to work with people who are, doing similar research. And those cross collaborations that you wouldn't necessarily get unless you were in something like this. So folks from public health are now working with folks in history, for example. I mean, I'm not saying that Write Out created all of that, but retreats can make those connections. Or, you have people coming from all over to come to your retreat. So now you have potential for cross collaborations across universities or across, different types of scholars. So I was really reminded that these spaces, that it's not necessarily what is happening, but it's the container that we're building, so that people can come and write, which our institution should be actually doing.
Which you all are doing, IRRPP. Yeah.
Well, I don't think of us as an institution in that same way, but I guess. But yes, so, and we're valuing and providing the little thing, like just even food and snacks is huge for people, at least for me. And so it's really me thinking, oh, it's not we got to do a workshop every day. We got to it's the container that we're building.
Yeah. And I just led my first in-person retreat since the pandemic started last summer. And I don't know what it is about the timing of Inkwell's retreats, but pretty consistently when I lead a retreat, we come out and there's been a mass shooting.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to come out of retreat and you haven't been watching the news and you kind of come out to this thing in life. And at this retreat, one had happened just before we came. And on the last day of the retreat, we were kind of having our closing session and we were connecting with one another and talking about what we'd gotten out of the retreat. And I found out there are all these things happening in the retreat that I don't know about. I feel like the camp, like the
counselor. Yeah.
I'm like the camp counselor, and then I found out about all the shenanigans afterwards.
You're the cool camp counselor, but you still don't know anything.
That's right. I don't know anything that's happening, honestly. But one of the things I didn't know was happening was there had been someone at that retreat who lived in Buffalo. And we had gone right after the tragedy in Buffalo. And, this person sort of stood up and said, it was really important for me to be here in this space. She didn't know anybody in that retreat. And to be in this space with other women of color, to be going through this while I'm away from my family, but to be in some place where I could feel connected and held by people. And she's talking about this, she kind of starts crying, and 2 or 3 women get up and stand and come over to be with her and hold her. This whole entire time, the whole week she'd been there, this woman had been suffering, she'd asked for somebody to give her a ride to the post office that was nearby. Sometimes we're in these remote areas, so it's hard to get places. having no sense that this had something to do with what had just happened in Buffalo, but these women had been taking care of one another and had just met.
Mhm.
And I was so moved by that, that this had been that retreat had been a place where that relationship could form in such a short period of time, not just around your writing, not just around the fears you have about being a scholar, but actually about what it means to be, living in the US in places where that kind of violence happens, like right around the corner from where you live.
Mhm.
So it is, right? It's we do this thing, but it's really the space that we create so that other people can take care of one another that makes a difference.
Mhm.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I agree. So can you talk more about the specific retreats that you have created at Inkwell and more about, co-founding Write Out?
Yeah. I mean, what do you want to know about co-founding Write Out? Like sort of how we structured the retreats and what we were aiming for?
Yeah, like what was the catalyst? Like, I mean, I know you wanted to do something, but I think that there was more behind it besides just want. Although that's great too.
I mean, honestly, well, what I can talk about is what the coaching was like in Write Out, and say something about how my understanding of what the coaching should look like changed. So when we first started, I gave individual coaching sessions to every single person in the retreat every single day. Now there are only 10, but that was hefty. And then when I started Inkwell, I did the same thing, and they were longer sessions. I pretty quickly figured out that was not going to work, right? I realized at some point I was standing around telling people that they needed to have a sustainable, healthy writing habit, and I was working from 6 a.m. until like 8 p.m. That wasn't. So I realized, I needed for myself to change over to group coaching sessions. I thought this was going to be terrible. I was worried. I thought, Inkwell is not going to survive this. No one's going to like them. No one's going to want to talk about these things because they're so private. I can see now that I was trying to do some emotional work for people by protecting them from having to share with one another. Totally wrong. Pretty much every time I've had to make a decision about Inkwell that I thought was a bust, it turned out it was exactly the right thing, because it was in the talking with one another that people came to see, oh, you know what? It's not just me. And this is the thing about a retreat that I cannot manufacture on my own ever. Saying to someone over and over again, I work with hundreds of people, they have all had this problem, is totally different from when they see an endowed professor talking about having the exact same problem that they're having. Then they're like, oh, it actually isn't just me. So moving from individual to group coaching, I think, has been really important for me, and for what Inkwell could do. Did I answer your question, Deana?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would like to also, I love the idea of going from group or individual coaching, although I know you do that too, but also group coaching. And it also breaks breaks down what academic institutions kind of silo us or force us to do. It's like, no, we're in this together, right? We're working together. And that's how we're moving through this entire process.
Yeah.
So when you, I remember when you started graduate student Write Out, when that was just Write Out.
Yeah.
You and Francesca were saying, there was this lack in the university for a place for graduate students. And then you started faculty Write Out kind of for the same reasons. Is that right?
I think I was gone by the time you did faculty Write Out, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think that there was a lot of, when are we getting a Write Out when I was still here?
I know.
But I think that was y'all.
Oh. Well, congratulations to us.
Yes.
But I want to bring up that the two of you really, and it's not, of course, we don't go it alone. The other folks at IRRPP, because we're a small, mighty team, we're also supportive, but that you created this thing that was needed. Like you saw the need. It's like, you know what, we're gonna move some funds around and we're gonna make this happen because we are invested in these people.
Yeah, but let me just give Francesca Gaiba all the credit for that. Honestly, like she was the one who rolled up into our meeting, was like, I saw somebody do this thing and I think we should do this. What do you all think? And then when we got around to the part about the coaching, I was thinking about this earlier today. You know, Francesca and Beth and I were in a meeting, and Francesca said, I think we need somebody to kind of talk to the students a little bit and give them some sort of direction. And I really wanted to do it, but I didn't want to be all grabby. But you know, I was all grabby. I was afraid Beth was going to say, oh, I'll do it. And you know what? I just jumped in there and said, I can do that. I can do that. Beth didn't want to do it, so it was all good. I was like, I don't know what I was thinking. She was like, you all take care of that. But
you're like, I don't want Beth Ritchie to do it, so I'm gonna grab because I know she wants to definitely do it.
Well, you know, that just kind of, I was obsessed with writing at that point, and I was really excited about it, and I thought it would be fun, and it, you know, it was more than fun. It was magical.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I'm sure your folks are like, oh my God, Deana, can you, like, you're so effusive over this person. Like, how amazing is she actually? It's pretty damn amazing. I mean, you really transformed people's graduate students and faculty's or graduate students' ways of writing. And that means transforming ways of going through and finishing their degrees and getting through academia. And I think that's really important.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think maybe I would want to say that I maybe helped them make the transformation, right? Mm-hmm. Like they transformed themselves because they saw something that they hadn't seen before, not because I changed them in any way. I didn't change them.
Right.
I saw something that they couldn't see, and I invited them to try something that would allow them to check to see whether or not the thing I saw was really true. And then they discovered that it was whatever that thing was.
Yeah, I appreciate that reframe. That's really important. And I also want to point out that, you know, going back to the idea about coaching is that the way we have been talking about it is we're also, how do I say, we're not softies, right? We're firm too. Like when people go down I'm terrible at this, I stop and say, that's not what I'm asking you. I want you to think deeply about your strengths because that's what we're leaning into. And that's what I want to, you're trying to accomplish this goal. Let's break it down and let's figure out how we can get you to that goal each day. And not just, oh, it's okay.
Yeah, no.
You know, I mean, because we want people to do that transformation and we want people to be or have the success that they want to have.
Yeah. I feel like I'm delivering bad news all the time when I'm coaching.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like with that question of, you know, people are always asking me, how do I, you know, write without being afraid? I'm like, you can't. You gotta write while you're afraid, and then the fear goes away. Nobody wants to hear that. Everybody comes to me and wants me to get rid of their fear, but I can't do that. I have a lot of great suggestions though about how to ride the fear till it gets to a place where it's not stopping you anymore. So that's what I mean when I say I'm delivering bad news. Definitely not a softie.
I want to reframe that though.
Okay.
So when
you feel I'm a softie?
No, you're definitely not a softie. You're firm. Okay. And you're great. No, I want to reframe the idea that you're delivering bad news.
Oh yeah.
Because when someone says, oh, no, you're going to be afraid. You will be afraid. It's like, oh, okay. So this is natural. It's not something that's inside of me. This is natural. That, like when you said, oh, we're going to start writing and people, so when my shoulders went up when you said that earlier, but when you said, oh no, yeah, you're going to be afraid and we're going to write it out. I was like, oh, okay, cool. All right, this is not, I can do this then. So I think you're making it okay. So you're delivering good news.
Yeah. I like that. Thanks for that reframe.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
That's what I'm here for.
I know you are.
Before we we have a bunch of questions. Great. And so percolating questions here too. So we started off talking about being emboldened. So when I ask you a difficult question, is how can we become emboldened writers? And let me, while you're thinking about that, it can be, this could also, you could think of it as an advice question or a common problems question or a different type of question. So however you want to answer that.
Well, I'll actually invite people to ask specific versions of how can I become emboldened, either, you know, on Zoom or here in the room, because one of the things about how I coach is I think of myself as a very ethnographic coach. And what I mean by that is typically when somebody asks me something, I ask them to tell me what it looks like in great detail when it goes the way that they don't want it to go, right? So for me, I actually find it really useful to get specific questions. So I will keep my answer at the broader level. I've already said one, but I think it bears repeating, is that remembering how we create a pocket of calm for ourselves, how we can move ourselves out of a state of stress or panic, I think is one of the ways that we can do that. And there are some things that I tend to teach over and over again that can help with that. One is creating what I call a writing refuge. And I mean a container for your writing that protects your time, your energy, and attention. And the reason that a refuge is so helpful is because it decreases the number of things that are coming into your attention and your orbit that are inflaming you, right? That are stressing you out. Like a simple one is email. If you're checking your email before you're writing and then you think that you're going to be calm afterwards, right? And in that instance, we've invited stress into a chamber that I think is most helpful when it is, I mean, I try to avoid this language, but almost sacred, right? That nothing can come in because I need protection in order to write. So that's just one example. Creating a refuge can solve a lot of problems, especially if the problem is the getting started. I would say the second I'll mention is social writing, which is essentially what a retreat is. Social writing just means that you're writing with someone else and you're reflecting on your writing with them. So it's not just being in the same room and writing, it is the act of we write side by side, right? And then we have a conversation about it. And what happens when those conversations are well structured is that, again, they unseat that story that you got going in your head about how, oh, this didn't really count. And you know what, I have so much more to do before it's finished anyway. And the deadline is right around the corner and all the things that make it meaningless, all the work you did. So, you know, we can create a kind of relational space that's the kind you and I see when we lead a retreat, when we're engaged in social writing with other people. And it's very, I want to say this is not the same thing as accountability. Accountability is great. It's a little overused at this point, but it's great. But what a retreat is about, or what social writing is about accompaniment. And there's something very different happening with accompaniment. I have an alum from the Composed Retreat who refers to this as borrowed fortitude. Borrowed fortitude. And that's correct. So I would say those two things. If I was going to give kind of two big things that we can all do, that we can all do pretty easily, actually. We can all think of one thing we could do to protect our attention or to protect our energy when we're writing. It would be create yourself a writing refuge that nobody gets in, and write with others and reflect with others about your writing so that you can disrupt the stories that tend to undermine the success you're actually experiencing.
Thank you for that.
You bet.
So we do have some questions in the Q&A. So I want to ask one of them and then we'll go back and forth. So the first question is that I'm going to read is, what are some ways to, quote, ride the fear, end quote, when you are writing in order to get unstuck?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, I'll say there are a lot of things in the book. This is one of the things I'm most delighted about, is that there's a ton of stuff to try in the book. So instead of necessarily needing to talk to me directly, you can read the book and have lots of things you can experiment with. But I'll just offer one with the caveat that I don't know the answer to that question for this person, right? What everybody needs is different. But one strategy that I have seen work for many, many people, part of the problem with our fear often is that, I keep saying this over and over again, is the story that we're telling. So to the extent that we can stop verbalizing that story, we are often more likely to get ourselves into a moment of calm. And so one thing you might try, actually, is switching to sensation. So switching from story to sensation. So instead of looping through your mind about what is happening and what's going wrong and all the things that this is going to mean, pick one thing one sensation that you're going to concentrate on. You can concentrate on the bottom of your feet. You could, pay attention to your breath. Notice I'm not saying meditating. Meditating is a very different thing, and it actually often brings you back to your thoughts. One way of switching to sensation I find really lovely is to take a sonic walk, and to walk and try to identify every single sound you're hearing all at once while you're hearing it. Will take you out of your thoughts very quickly, because it's actually quite difficult to do. That's just one thing, right? So the general principle, again, is trying to find your way out of story and into body can often be a way to calm yourself down without saying, okay, calm yourself down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. It's like,
yeah.
I don't know much about somatics.
Yeah.
But it sounds like somatics to me from what I know. And grounding yourself.
Absolutely.
Question. Yes. I'm going to have you use it.
Thank you. Such an honor I've heard so much about you, and
Thank you.
it's a pleasure to have you in the space and learn more. I guess my particular question is about, and it might be too kind of like grand, but and I'm a junior faculty member, so I think there's a certain level of shame that comes with being an assistant professor, or just a professor in general, who doesn't feel like they've been taught how to write and are still trying to figure out how to write, and also teaching other people how to write. I wonder what your how you broach that, maybe in your own sort of experience working with junior faculty members who seem to, I oftentimes feel kind of pushed out to sea and assumed to kind of know what I'm doing all the time, and not feeling as though you have the sort of spaces where you can be honest about feeling as though I actually don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Yeah.
It makes complete sense. And I would say I hear this a lot. I think you're right about there being a great deal of shame. And in that particular configuration, right? Like, oh, there are all these other people who did learn how to do it and I didn't, which I think we feel, and I have not seen evidence that was actually the case, right? So, but that doesn't matter when we're feeling it. And so there are a couple things. One, I think know how to write means a lot of different things. Like, know how to write could mean know the genre. That's actually kind of an easy one, right? Because we can figure out the genre. I mean, like, we can ask about that one, but it sometimes does mean that. And I think it can get mixed in with the second thing, which is the thing I tend to be really interested in, which is what's my writing process? And the beautiful thing about your writing process is that that is not something that you need someone else to teach you. Or maybe the better way to say it is a writing process. a writing process is something that we already have some sense of. If you're here, you've written, and so there's a way that you tend to go through the process that you just do because it makes more sense to you. It's how you see what you're trying to say. In that instance, it is not about going out and getting some external knowledge. It is actually more about uncovering what's already there and then practicing using that to learn to trust yourself. And so I feel like I'm giving you a partial answer because it's not an answer that sort of immediately leads to a reduction in shame, but I do think it reorients you from, oh, let me go out and get what somebody else has and that I just missed, to, you know what, I don't feel it right now, but there is something that I know, and how can I concentrate on that first? And which is, you know, I teach a technique for doing this in the book that shows you both the things that you're very clear on and you know you do really well and it works for you, and it's also going to show the holes, right? But that's okay because you have some ground where, you know what, I got this part over here. This part's a little shaky for me, but when you can experience both of those at the same time, I think what it ends up doing is building your trust in yourself that, okay, maybe I don't know this, but I'm a researcher and I know how to find it out, right? And it's not just about, there's not a, Dave Stovall uses this phrase all the time, the secret knowledge, right? There is no secret knowledge when it comes to writing. There is a set of helpful principles that you can dive into and see how they work for you. Does that help at all?
That helps a lot.
Okay.
No, thank
right.
you so much. And I'm sure there are other things in the book, so I'll get the book.
Yeah, yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
You can.
Thank you. So another, I think more specific question. So this person says they research trauma and are a trauma survivor. So their question is, what advice do you have for anyone whose work is capital very closely tied to their life experience?
I feel like that's actually two questions which maybe were not intended. I do want to say that I am not someone who is qualified to work with trauma, right? I do think that that is a different level of care that needs to be taken. And I would almost say that to the extent that what happens in a writing retreat does raise feelings, if anyone who's listening to this feels that they're coming from a space of trauma, that they need a better trained source of help than me, honestly, right? So I think that's really important to note and to know that that's your due, right? To have that care. All right. So then the second question was, I'm sorry, that the real question was, can you repeat it for me, Deana? Yeah.
What advice do you have for anyone whose work is capital very closely tied to their life experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one that I feel like I encountered a lot as a professor. And I love this question. Two things are coming to me initially. One is that an extra level of care is required. And I know that sounds vague, but what I mean is I think we tend to think of the moments when we sit down to write is this is an intellectual task. I just need to do my work. You know, there's a lot of forcing, there's a lot of discipline. And similar to what I said earlier about seducing yourself, I actually think that carrying yourself into the moment is something, and whatever that looks like for you is something that I would really want to encourage someone who's having that experience to do, whatever that looks like. And the thing that it feels to me that might look like for someone is to actually be in pretty constant contact with people who they feel are their people. And I don't mean, I guess I mean both people in an intellectual environment, right? Like, who are you writing with? Is there people that you trust? Not necessarily. A lot of people go to their mentors, or they'll go to their advisors, or they'll go to people in their cohort. But do you trust that person? That's my question. When somebody is trying to create a writing group or a writing buddy, I don't care about the substance. My suggestion is always, could you trust that person? Are you okay if that person sees you tear up? And so I mean both in the professional environment, but I also mean, especially for graduate students of color who come to this environment, and then all of a sudden year 1, year 2 in, and there's this, you're turning into a totally different person, right? And sometimes that connection you felt with your people from where you're from, they don't understand what you're going through, and then there's this gap. So I think, even though it doesn't seem like it would be relevant, actually, to whatever extent you can, be maintaining that contact with whoever my people are, not because it's going to translate directly into words on a page, but because it's going to, we know that being in cohort, right? We know that being in community is what gets undergraduates through their programs. It's what gets graduate students through their programs, especially scholars of color. And creating that with people who are part of your home community, I think, is also one thing that can be really, really useful. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Other questions out in the in-person world?
In the in-person world.
Yeah, hold on. This is a little personal, getting to know you a little bit more. So you wrote a book about writing and writing process. What were your biggest trip ups and agonies along this journey of creating the book, and therefore also what might we receive as your audience in terms of really the gems, maybe even hidden gems that are in there that you've been able to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to be here another few hours for me to explain all the agonies of that book. But I'll tell you, the second chapter is, chapter 1 sort of says, what does stuck look like? Here are a few ways that we see what it looks like. And chapter 2 says, what are the challenges that we face? And, what are the different kinds of challenges, and how do we think about them? And one of the things I wanted to do in that chapter is to really have people come away with like, wow, no wonder this is hard. And that involved something different from the research that I did for my first book, right? It was my dissertation. I turned it into a book. It was a book on which I got tenure. It was like a very conventional research project. I had to write this book drawing on research. You can take the girl out of the university, but you can't take the university out of the girl. So I think about the work, the literature, the data, but it wasn't primary data, right? It wasn't data I had collected. And I couldn't go as deep into every topic that I wanted to point to as I would have if I had been a scholar. So it was hard for me to figure out, when am I providing enough convincing data to argue this point and convince you? And when am I basically just piling on numbers because I'm afraid you're going to think I'm not smart? And that was partly a genre problem. So that was a second problem I had, which is I didn't know how to organize these daggone chapters, because it wasn't the book I'd written before, and it wasn't like any book I had seen. The closest I kind of could come to is Carrie Ann Rockamore's book on Don't Lose Your Soul. You know what I'm talking about, yeah. But even that wasn't quite it. And I struggled for a long time just not even knowing where information should go. What should a chapter look like? And honestly, I kind of just stumbled on the answer in a way that's a little bit embarrassing, but I'm going to tell you anyway, which was, I don't know how I found this, but I found this ridiculous blog post that said something like how to write your book in 30 days. It wasn't for academics, but what they were talking about was a self-help book. And there was some link to the basic outline of a self-help book. And the outline was, you present a problem, you talk about where the problem comes from, you talk about the challenges that people have faced in trying to solve it, and you offer a different solution. And I was like, bing. It was a new genre. And I was frustrated because I didn't know how to, to me, it just looked like I didn't know what I was saying. I don't know what I'm doing. But it wasn't that. It was that I didn't even recognize that I was having a genre problem. And I happened to just literally it just happened that I stumbled upon it. So those two things are really difficult for me. I would say a third thing was, I could keep you all day with this. You just stop me anytime. I started a business. And I had no idea how much work that is. And then I realized I felt badly if I wasn't writing. And there was a lot of time when I wasn't writing. I started a business. I moved to a new city where I knew no one, away from people I had spent my entire professional life with, all my friends, my entire community. I was geeked about it. Don't get me wrong. I was excited, but I didn't understand how disruptive that was. And then I started a project that I had no idea how to do. I know how to coach, but I did not know how to run a business. So I wasn't writing. So I gave myself a really hard time about that. I was really embarrassed about it. How are you going to be a writing coach not writing their book? What's that about? And then I realized, writing actually isn't my primary priority right now. It took me years to figure that out. Actually, it wasn't the most important thing, as it had been for the last 13 years of my life. And so then I had to figure out, how are you going to get it done if it's not the most important thing? So I struggled a lot with, at every stage of this manuscript, it was uncomfortable. Did I answer your question? I don't feel like I gave you any answers for how I managed it. I mean, honestly, I do a lot of what I coach. And I will say that one of the best things about coaching is two things. I'm not kidding you when I tell you I'm so in awe of the people I coach, because they are working so hard. It's so difficult. They're so afraid, and then they get up every day and they face their fears. I'm so inspired by that. And I can't give advice that I don't follow. So it also requires me to actually live up to the effort that I'm asking other people to make. So that's part of what happened to get me over those humps. Some of it was luck, some of it was slow realization, and some of it was I had to actually, not just talk the talk, but actually walk the walk. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a institution question.
Ooh.
From the Zoom.
Yeah.
So this person says, Write Out is amazing and clearly a success. Just looking at how many other spaces that have created Write Out-esque situations here at UIC. And what comes to mind is just your ideas that could create better institutional conditions to help writing flourish in university spaces or other institutional spaces beyond departments or units saying, go ahead and go to a retreat. Like, you're struggling with writing, go to a retreat.
Okay. I mean, I'll just name two that are just popping into my head. Okay. Not vetted, but just literally just popping into my head. I know, this is going to sound so unrealistic that you're going to wonder why I said it, but lower tenure standards. Stop asking people to write more and 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 more. Honestly, that's one of them. The second would be to make the tenure process more transparent. I just had a conversation with a colleague who teaches in Canada, who said to me that the tenure expectations are written out so that the faculty actually know what they're going for. And that I think that she said that the review process, it doesn't go through all the layers of review that we tend to, I don't know if this is universal in the US, but I feel like it's pretty common, right? That goes through all these levels of review outside of the department or the college. Now, I think you could have a debate about whether or not that is a good idea, but I also think it would be worth it to have the debate about whether or not that's a good idea, whether or not it makes sense to spend faculty time, effort in the committees where the physicist has to be explained what's happening with the humanist, right? So I just, honestly, like that seems pretty, I know that that's a big ask, but that's what the question was, I think, right? There's a difference between what we can do individually in the communities that we create to support meeting the requirements, but there's a fundamental problem here about the fact that the standards for getting a job now are what they used to be to get tenure. And if we're not willing to have a conversation about that, things are going to continue as they are. That's Michelle getting a little ranty about this thing that she feels. I feel very strongly about this. It's probably not what the person was asking, but those are just honestly two things.
What about for graduate students?
Well, I think there's some way that those things actually apply for graduate students, right? Because that expectation starts early. I do think that it's important not to expect for faculty members to be writing coaches. I will say that because I think it's very easy for the answer to feel like, well, what should happen is that faculty who are experiencing the same demand should somehow all of a sudden develop a new set of skills and coach their students. Right. So I mean, again, this is very simplified. I know this, right? And I'm not in a university anymore, so I can walk around and make suggestions like this, but fund your writing centers to support graduate students as well as undergraduate, as well as faculty members. Spend money on it. I know, again, there's a more complex conversation to be had there, but it's not about just going to a retreat, right? It's about having a writing center that recognizes all of the dimension, a teaching and writing center that sees the connection between writing and teaching, and that provides the resources to develop all of the skills that we need in order to do our writing, which include these emotional skills, which include the development of community and the things that we've talked about today.
Mic drop. Just drop the mic. No, it's not our mic. Don't drop it.
I won't.
Yeah. Okay. We have one more question. One last question.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for coming, and
Thank you.
it's an honor to hear about you.
you.
I'm a high school student at Francis Parker, and I came because genuinely learning other people's perspectives and other people's experiences from and I'm a sophomore, but from growing my knowledge is just so much more pure than learning in a classroom and being taught, at least from my perspective. But I was wondering, how do I and how do we as a group form communities of treat yourself and learn your patterns before you go out to write, to live, act, because it's a whole process? And how do we support each other and communicate to each other? Because I mean, hormonally, me and all of my friends, we are crazy and we are growing and we are learning, and we might as well just get all of this down before we start this whole generation of chaos. Thank you.
I really appreciate your question. Thank you. I mean, I guess in some ways I might be repeating myself, but maybe let me try to do it in a layered way. I think we connect with other people. And I think that connection can look 1,000 different ways. That connection can be a one-on-one connection with someone who you know is going to show up for the writing for you when you want to engage in some social writing. That connection can look like a group of people writing together regularly or writing together irregularly, right? Like at the end of every semester, having a weekend where they kind of, get together, eat good food, and write together. It can be that same thing when you're not doing any writing at all, right? Where you're just hanging out, connecting with people that you trust so that there's space for you to be a whole human being that then supports your writing is, I feel like, the broadest way that I can kind of answer that question that will bear the most fruit. And I guess it also seems to me that part of what I am suggesting or asking people to do is to be the friend to themselves that they are to other people. And that's part of why being with other people can help you do that, right? Because when you're in the pattern of treating someone else that way and they are treating you that way, that part of what you're doing is you're teaching one another how to treat oneself, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think the question, my question would be, well, what do you need? What do you want? And actually being willing to get clear about the answer to that question, and then connecting with someone who can bring you just a little bit closer to that in whatever way you most need. That's what I'd say.
Can we get a round of applause and maybe reactions on Zoom for Michelle? Thank you so much for being here. It's so exciting. I'm so happy about the book, Becoming the Writer You Already Are. I just want to go ahead and do this up here and also show off my nails. And thank you for being here, for coming back to UIC. Thank you all for being here in the room and on Zoom.